Hi guys, thanks for all your input on the nonfiction version of this video. In my head, I thought I made this fiction part too. I guess because I outlined it a while ago, I thought that this already existed and had been posted. So imagine my surprise looking over my homepage this past week and being like, wait a second. So for real, in the real world, here's the fiction that I read from Central and Eastern Europe last year. You guys know the drill, keep the recommendations coming. And I've started timestamping within video so that you can more easily find what you might be looking for. Starting with two classics. The first is The Sufferings of Prince Sternenhoch, a grotesque tale of horror by Ladislav Klíma, not Ivan Klíma. People can get huffy if they think I'm, mixing the two up and calling the latter a whack job when really it was Ladislav who was possibly clinically insane. In the more olden days, what they called eccentric. One of my favorite tidbits from his Wikipedia page is something like, Klíma spent the later part of his life living in a hotel, shining shoes for a living, drinking spirits, and eating vermin. My spiritual brethren. This 1928 novel was translated from Czech by Carleton, Bulkin, and it follows a German nobleman's descent into madness and his grappling with his own will to the point where he achieves what he hopes is salvation. It's an acid trip in novel form, basically. And I personally love that the title is making fun of the Sarzung-Wörter. Literary jokes, The other much more famous classic is The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky. My first big novel of his, and I loved it, especially the opening 120-page section, which follows the events of a single day and is chaotically immaculate, I would say. Dostoevsky was basically like, let me take a pure soul and put him in St. Petersburg and see how he gets on. And it's this sprawling madcap commentary on how the other characters treat this prince's goodness and openness as proof of his stupidity. It's one of Dostoevsky's more personal novels because it describes his experiences of near execution and of living with epilepsy. Now, I read the Russian translation from Richard Pevear and Larissa Volokhonsky, and they're a case study in backlash inevitably following praise, and it's the natural cycle of translation preferences, really. I mean, before, they were the ones who were being used to show how inferior prior translations had been, and now it's kind of more in vogue to criticize P&V, but to my untrained eye, some of the things that they're generally criticized for, like choices that are stilted in English, not idiomatic, those things work well for Dostoevsky particularly. They're faithful to the strangeness. These next three were all favorites of 2020, so that video is linked below if you want to hear more. First is The Masochist by Katja Perat, translated from Slovenian by Michael Biggins. This book. It's one of those that takes a fictionalized protagonist and sets them in a part of history with a lot of famous figures, in this case, turn of the century Vienna. Our narrator is the daughter of the man who inspired the sexual term masochist. Ultimately, the novel is positing that part of growing up, even when you're already an adult, is coming to terms with the fact that you're not special. Powerful lesson in a really fun and powerful book. Second is Wasted Morning by Gabriela Adameșteanu, translated from Romanian by Patrick Camiller, which follows the members of a fallen family over the course of 20th century Romanian history. And this is a good one if you're in the mood for something ponderous and atmospheric, or a story that's told from multiple perspectives, where you have the same scene from different viewpoints. This is that experience. Although I do want to mention that, to my knowledge, the English translation is only available in this print hardcover edition, which I know is an accessibility issue for some people. Third of this bunch was translated from Hungarian by Len Rix. It's The Door by Magda Szabó, which is just so good. That's my pitch, you guys. It's good. Love yourselves. This is following a writer and her housekeeper. The housekeeper is an absolute force of nature. And it's one of the most insightful books I can remember reading about vulnerability. And I'm so drawn in general to unconventional love stories. Stories that touch on love outside of traditional family, friendship, and romance. The in-between people in our lives, I guess is what I'm saying. I hate to break this to you, but not all my viewers are cat people. They don't necessarily want to just see your ears in the background of the shot here. Your little astronaut Conehead. A contemporary Russian author is Ludmilla Petrushevskaya. I read her collection, There Once Lived a Woman Who Tried to Kill Her Neighbor's Baby. This is translated by Keith Gessen and Anna Summers. Gessen and Summers collected various stories from this author and put them into a few categories like requiems, allegories, etc. But these are all quite dark, fable-esque tales of jealousy and repression and revenge. There's a real contrast with writers whose stories are inward-looking and parse characters' intricate personal psychologies, where Petrushevskaya's stories are so externalized. The outside world is viewed as this nightmarish reflection on the grimness inside. There's a sense that we've made the world in our image and it's not pretty. There's also the question of how you cope if the stories inside you don't match what the world is feeding you, and characters go on to create or find their own worlds. So this is fabulous in all senses of the word, and I'm very happy to have found this author. Wow, this new light is really driving home that I don't powder and didn't put on any base products today. Yikes. We're hopping from strange to stranger at this point. The Feline Plague by Maja Novak was translated from Slovenian by Maja Visenjak-Limon, and it's essentially if Borges and Heather O'Neill had a book baby, this would be their messy but lovable child. It follows the employees of a chain of designer pet stores called Empire, and it's a commentary on the clash of rabid capitalism and obstinate communism in the 90s, when Slovenia was one of the first countries to break away from Yugoslavia. My favorite storyline was a quest for a special breed of cat. Actually, hang on, I want to find some parts of this. As it is Eastern cats we are dealing with here, it goes without saying that they are talkative, and if you berate them, they can even be argumentative. Vaughns have an above-average maternal instinct and carefully observe the antics of their offspring. Even after they mature sexually, the mother still brings her cats to them, at the same time letting them know subtly that they should be grateful for her self-sacrifice. While the intelligence of an average cat, according to Binet's scale, is between 40 and 50 IQ points, we can without any reservation give Vaughan cats 60 points, which is more than can be ascribed to Binet and other similar intellectuals. I personally had very little idea what was happening at various points, but if you gravitate toward the zanier end of magical realism, I think this could be a fun read for you. Last from this section of authors, I read 4 of the Witcher books by Andrzej Sapkowski, translated from Polish by Danusia Stok. So I read 2 of the short story collections, The Last Wish and Sword of Destiny, and then the first 2 novels in the series, Blood of Elves and The Time of Contempt, which follow on chronologically from the stories. If you enjoyed the video games or the Netflix series, or you're just looking for classic feeling epic fantasy, I really suggest that you start with The Last Wish. People hear short story collection and imagine that this book won't be as natural of an entry point into the series as a novel, but in my view, in this case, the collections are better. They're a more solid introduction to the characters. They're more emotionally perceptive and in a lot of ways actually less fragmented than the novels. The first season of the Netflix series draws most heavily from the story collections, especially The Last Wish. But this is one of those cases where the books made me grapple a lot more seriously with the ethical questions of this world. The TV series has a British and North American slant on things, which is understandable, but I think that can obscure Sapkowski's major inspiration, which is old Polish folklore. And I'm trying to resist, but I could go into a spiel here about American cultural imperialism and how even readers who are making a really thoughtful case of reading more diversely can fall into the trap of, projecting our cultural understanding onto foreign books because we tacitly expect all books to speak to our history. I've seen people be like, well, what could you expect from an old white man writing about oppression? And it's like, yeah, what could a Polish person understand about oppression or complex identity politics? Like that coarse, muffled feeling, that's sand. Take your head out of it. Anyway, if I ever make a full video on this series, I'll probably expand on those ranty thoughts, but that's all I'll subject you to for now. Quickly now, because I'm not following my outline, I want to talk about 4 more books that are not entirely from or about the region necessarily, but that intersect in some ways. So the first of those is High as the Waters Rise by Anya Kampmann, translated from German by Anne Poston. And I was sent a copy of this from Catapult last year. but Lila's straight up squatted on it her second day here. This is about a middle-aged man named Václav whose best friend goes missing from their job on an oil rig, so he's presumed drowned. And Václav ends up going on this diffuse journey that includes a stop at his friend's childhood home in a Hungarian village. I liked how ambiguous their relationship was. You could make an argument textually either way that they were or weren't lovers, but either way you get this unusual emphasis on masculine intimacy. But truthfully, this book was operating at a level of such extreme removal that even for me, someone who thrives on bleak, emotionally distant narratives, I found it difficult to parse the author's intentions a lot of the time. So I'd be curious to hear if any of you have read this, and especially if you maybe have read it in the original German, if you have additional context. Next is the middle grade novel, The Story That Cannot Be Told by J. Caspar Kramer. And this is one of my favorites from the list. It was a gift from a friend, and she was totally right about it. I found it enchanting. It's about a young Romanian girl named Ileana, whose uncle goes into hiding after he criticizes the Communist Party. And so Ileana is sent from busy Bucharest to her grandparents' remote mountain village. It's full of folklore and drama. Like with most books with this kind of arc, I enjoyed the whole extended build-up a lot more than the final action sequences. But I was just so impressed with this as a middle grade debut, and I would love to find more children's books set in or about these countries. I was sent this collection of mostly flash fiction from Soft School Press. Another debut here. Pollock is working in the tradition of imaginary off-kilter worlds that are casually combined with ours. Now, flash fiction for me doesn't often have that full impact that even a slightly longer short story does, and so I don't remember a ton of these, but there are a few that have stuck with me, especially one slightly longer story called Thursdays at Waterhouse that's Gogol-esque. It's featuring a man who week by week has all his clothes stolen at a bathhouse, until one day he goes into work and sees people wearing his clothes. I was taken with Pollock's atmosphere, her mixture of dread and resignation. One of the 4 sections in here is called Slovak Scenery, so I'm guessing she might have some Slovak origins in her family. I don't know if this style would translate to a full novel, but I would really like to see a collection of longer stories from this author. And then finally, I read Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Now, this is really considered an American novel, though it was first published in France, but Nabokov is one of the purest cases I can think of a hyphenated writer, truly Russian and American, so I didn't want to deny his Russian identity too by not including him here. Yeah, I read Lolita. I appreciated a lot of the craft of it. It's the kind of thing you can't help but annotate, and I was extremely disturbed, as I'm guessing Nabokov intended, but also I found this extremely tedious, which I think was likely not the intention. I may do a classic or contemporary pairing video on this at some point if I have the time and the will, but do I need Lolita stans coming out of the woodwork and telling me that I can't read because I don't think this is the most impressive book that was ever impressive? Do I need that in my life? Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'd love to have your recommendations and thoughts below. Bye, guys.